The living room, bathed in the afternoon sun, was the stage for their familiar drama. Pedro lay on the sofa, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only other sound. Beside him, Mia, his sleek Siamese cat, watched him with an intensity that seemed almost human. For a moment, she stretched, a fluid, graceful curve of her body. Then, with a barely perceptible spring, she landed softly on his chest. A deep, resonant purr vibrated through him, a melody of pure contentment that filled the quiet space. Pedro smiled, his fingers automatically beginning to stroke Mia's incredibly soft fur, feeling the familiar warmth of her small body. She nestled in, her head tucked snugly under his chin, and he felt that comforting wave of affection, a profound sense of genuine connection that always seemed to ground him. But then, as abruptly as a sudden shift in the wind, Mia's body tensed. Her ears swiveled, sensing something unseen, unheard. Her eyes, moments ago half closed in bliss, narrowed to slits of emerald intensity. With a swift, almost imperceptible leap, she detached herself from him, landing on the floor with the ethereal lightness of a falling feather. Without a backward glance, she padded silently away, her tail held high, disappearing through the slightly ajar door. Pedro remained there, his hands still suspended in the air, a silent gesture of affection unreceived. The warmth of the cat's body, so present moments before, dissipated, leaving behind a sudden, unexpected void, a sharp pang of bewilderment. It was a scene that played out repeatedly, a bewildering pattern he tried, in vain, to decipher, always feeling that inexplicable abandonment arise without any apparent reason. To truly grasp this puzzling, abrupt shift in affection, we must delve into the primal instincts of the domestic cat. This creature, which has, for thousands of years, chosen to coexist with humans, still carries a profound inheritance of independence and self-preservation woven into its very DNAs. Unlike the social bonds of a dog, the cat is fundamentally a solitary predator, an opportunistic hunter designed to survive on its own without the reliance on a pack. Its affection, therefore, is not a bond of subordination or a plea for constant interaction, but rather a carefully granted permission for proximity, a considered acknowledgement that the human, at certain moments, offers comfort, warmth, and security. When Mia purred deeply on Pedro's chest, she was expressing an authentic moment of well-being, a state of deep relaxation and trust. However, the powerful, innate instinct to maintain her autonomy, to fiercely preserve her personal space, and her intrinsic capacity to act independently is an undeniable force. The sudden transition to detachment isn't a rejection or a display of disdain. It's a fundamental return to her core essence. It's a primal movement to reaffirm her individuality, to test the boundaries of her personal domain, and perhaps simply to pursue an imagined rustle in the leaves or an invisible mow in the sunlight. Mia's inherent ambiguity profoundly mirrors our own complex human struggle between the deep-seated need for connection and the equally potent longing for autonomy. Within the intricate architecture of the human brain, the release of oxytocin, often dubbed the love hormone, occurs during affectionate social interactions, generating a profound sense of well-being and bonding. Yet, simultaneously, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher-order executive functions, responsible for decision-making, planning, and self-regulation, powerfully propels us towards independence, towards the pursuit of individual goals and self-actualization. We are, by our very nature, fundamentally social beings, hardwired for connection, but we are equally robust individuals. Just like the cat, which instinctively seeks warmth and comfort, yet retains its agile readiness to jump and vanish, the human being yearns for deep, meaningful bonds, but also intrinsically requires personal space, unyielding identity, and a sense of self not diluted by the other. Neuroscience consistently demonstrates that the brain strives for a courage strives for a fair for series. This constantly demonstrates that the brain strives for a delicate equilibrium between the undeniable rewards of social connection and the crucial imperative of self-preservation. To ignore or deny this inherent duality in our nature can inevitably lead to dysfunctional relationships, either through a suffocating fusion that erodes individuality or through a pervasive detachment that engenders profound loneliness. As Pedro sat there, his hands suspended in midair, he felt the familiar sharp pang of rejection, even though intellectually he knew Mia acted not out of malice but instinct. But what if he, like Mia, possessed the innate courage to overtly express his own deep-seated need for space? What if he could, without a flicker of guilt or the need for elaborate justifications, leap away when proximity, even affectionate proximity, became overwhelming or suffocating? The ingrained human instinct to please, to perpetually maintain social harmony, often tragically prevents us from asserting our own vital boundaries, thereby trapping us in relationships where reciprocity is fundamentally imbalanced. In the sudden silence of the living room, Pedro found himself confronting a profound choice. Would he continue to passively await Mia's fickle return, much like a loyal, ever-waiting dog, or would he finally recognize his own inherent need to move to withdraw, to seek his own internal sunshine and quietude, even if only for a brief restorative moment? The captivating feline duality, which both intrigues and bewilders us, stands as a vivid, undeniable reminder of our own profound complexity. The cat, in its graceful, almost regal independence, offers us a timeless lesson. True affection does not imprison. It does not demand ownership or absolute possession, but rather gracefully allows the freedom to come and go. Understanding the cat's oscillation between profound affection and sudden detachment is a powerful invitation to not only recognize, but deeply respect this very same dynamic within ourselves and in others. May we, like these enigmatic felines, learn to comfortably inhabit both vital worlds, the enriching realm of deep, meaningful connection and the equally essential domain of serene, self-contained autonomy. May we find profound beauty in the unpredictable, yet ultimately harmonious dance between the yes and the no, between the near and the far. Carolina felt the crushing weight of her mother's gaze, an invisible but palpable force that had shaped her entire life. It was a lifetime punctuated by unsolicited advice, veiled judgments, and the constant, suffocating refrain of, "I know what's best for you." Even at 30, a successful professional, Carolina still found herself paralyzed by the elusive pursuit of maternal approval, or rather, by its persistent absence. Every decision she made, each career move, every nascent relationship was subjected to that silent, piercing scrutiny, leaving her in a perpetual state of heightened alert. She would approach, hesitantly, desperately seeking a crumb of affection, a moment of validation. But with each tentative step, she encountered a subtle, impenetrable barrier, a critical remark expertly disguised as concern. Trust in this dynamic was an ever-shifting, treacherous quicksand, and she, utterly exhausted, felt inextricably trapped in this relentless, unrequited quest for acceptance, bound to a profound desire that was never, ever fully met. Her throat would tighten, her hands would grow clammy. She was, once again, caught in a suffocating emotional dead end. Just as Carolina approaches with an ingrained hesitation, the domestic cat, despite its millennia of intimate coexistence with humans, inherently maintains a deep-seated, instinctive wariness. If a cat has experienced mistreatment or suffered from insufficient socialization during its formative kittenhood, it may develop deeply ingrained avoidance behaviors, even when genuine affection is offered. It might approach cautiously, tentatively sniffing an extended hand, perhaps even briefly rubbing its sleek body against a leg in a fleeting moment of contact. But then, A sudden, unexpected movement, a jarring sound, and in an instant, it will leap away, a blur of fur and muscle. The cat's trust is not freely given all at once, but rather painstakingly constructed in minute, fragile fragments, constantly subjected to subtle tests and reassessments. The feline gaze, often perceived as penetrating and intensely vigilant, is in fact a profound reflection of this innate ancestral caution, an ever-present readiness for flight, for absolute self-protection. They offer us a powerful, albeit often challenging, lesson. Vulnerability is a conscious choice, and the courageous act of opening oneself to affection fundamentally demands an environment built on continuous safety, unwavering respect, and absolute predictability. This pervasive behavior of wariness and profound caution in the cat directly mirrors an ancient, finely tuned alarm system, deeply embedded within the neural architecture of mammals that, throughout evolutionary history, functioned as both formidable predators and vulnerable prey. In humans, this fundamental wariness can be intricately mapped to specific brain structures, such as the amygdala, a key limbic region responsible for processing primal fear and aversion, and the prefrontal cortex, which meticulously evaluates potential risks and anticipates rewards. Individuals who have endured profound trauma or who were nurtured in environments characterized by inconsistent or unreliable validation frequently develop ambivalent attachment patterns. In these patterns, an intense, almost desperate desire for proximity coexists uneasily with a pervasive, debilitating fear of rejection or emotional harm. Just as a cat meticulously surveys and assesses a new environment, before it feels truly safe to relax and let down its guard, the traumatized or insecure human constantly scans relationships for subtle signs of potential danger instinctively, maintaining a protective emotional distance, even when the depths of their being yearn for true intimacy. The instinct for self-preservation, an overwhelmingly powerful force in the feline, profoundly shapes our emotional and social responses in ways that are often deeply ingrained and largely unconscious. Carolina felt a sharp, clarifying click of realization. That penetrating look from her mother, the insidious, veiled criticism, consistently propelled her into the very same heightened state of alert that a cat experiences when it senses an imminent threat. She was trapped, caught in an inescapable emotional snare. She was caught in a perpetual, exhausting cycle of frantic seeking and painful rejection. Yet, the profound, liberating truth was now undeniable. The choice was unequivocally hers. Would she continue to passively submit to that suffocating scrutiny, or would she, like the wise cat that instinctively retreats when it feels its boundaries threatened, fiercely defend her own sacred space and inner peace? The ultimate confrontation was not with her mother, but with her own deeply ingrained patterns. It didn't have to be an explosive, dramatic outburst. It could manifest as a deliberate, gradual distancing, a resolute establishment of clear, non-negotiable boundaries, a powerful leap out of that profoundly toxic dynamic. She desperately needed, in some profound way, to confront this deeply rooted instinct to relentlessly seek external approval at any cost, to reclaim her intrinsic worth. The fundamental nature of trust, when viewed through the unique and insightful lens of the feline, offers us a new, profound understanding. For the cat, trust is an extraordinarily valuable gift, meticulously earned through consistent patience, unwavering predictability, and profound respect for its autonomy. For the human, it forms the indispensable bedrock of healthy, thriving relationships, but it is simultaneously the most vulnerable point of entry for pain. The profound observation of the feline teaches us that inherent wariness, far from being a weakness, can actually function as a vital tool for protection. A primordial instinct that astutely alerts us to the critical necessity of thoroughly assessing the ground beneath our feet before we dare to fully surrender ourselves. Learning to precisely discern between healthy, protective caution and paralyzing, Debilitating fear is the crucial first step towards courageously building more authentic, resilient relationships where the act of genuine surrender does not equate to the agonizing loss of self, but rather the profound courage to authentically be who you are, even if that brave authenticity sometimes necessitates stepping away to preserve your very essence. Lucas felt a familiar, sickening knot tighten in his stomach every time his girlfriend, Sophia, would innocently ask, "What are you thinking?" He genuinely adored Sophia. Her vibrant company was a soothing balm for his often troubled soul, a comfort he deeply cherished. Yet, there were persistent, undeniable moments when he felt an overwhelming, almost primal need to retreat into himself, to get utterly lost in the labyrinthine corridors of his own thoughts, free from any perceived obligation to share, to explain, or to maintain a constant, effervescent presence. It was as if a vital, intrinsic part of him simply needed solitude to breathe, to process, to reorganize the often chaotic landscape of his inner world. But with every slight withdrawal, no matter how brief or subtle, came the relentless tide of guilt, the gnawing fear of being fundamentally misunderstood, of inadvertently causing her pain. He found himself inextricably caught between the powerful desire to be intimately close and the undeniable, equally potent need for his own solitary companionship. This ceaseless internal battle utterly exhausted him, leaving him with a persistent, unsettling sense of pervasive discomfort and gnawing anxiety. Independence is not merely a characteristic, but a defining essence of the domestic cat. Although they are undeniably capable of forming profound, deeply affectionate bonds with their human guardians, cats are not, by their very nature, pack animals. They do not possess the same inherent need for constant social validation or continuous interaction that, for instance, a dog might exhibit. The cat instinctively patrols its meticulously defined territory alone, hunts for its own sustenance, and actively seeks out its own sheltered sanctuary. Its innate ability to be self-sufficient, to autonomously manage its existence, is a deeply embedded, primordial trait. When a cat deliberately retreats to a quiet, sun-drenched corner of the house, perhaps to slumber in peaceful solitude or to meticulously observe the garden from a detached distance, it is not, in that moment, rejecting its human guardian. Instead, it is actively exercising its fundamental freedom, deliberately seeking out its own personal space of profound comfort and unwavering autonomy. This remarkable ability to be alone without experiencing loneliness is, perhaps, one of the most profound and vital lessons that these enigmatic felines so gracefully offer us. The profound human yearning for independence has deep, resonant roots in our evolutionary psychology. The intrinsic capacity to operate autonomously was historically crucial for survival in often hostile, unpredictable environments, enabling our ancestors to boldly explore novel resources and adeptly adapt to a myriad of challenging circumstances. Within the intricate neural networks of the human brain, this fundamental need for autonomy is meticulously processed in regions intimately linked to self-efficacy and internal control, most notably the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Conflicts that frequently arise in human relationships, where one partner intensely seeks more personal space while the other deeply desires greater proximity, are remarkably common and, regrettably, often profoundly misunderstood. Just as the cat fundamentally requires its own delineated territory and moments of profound solitude to maintain its intrinsic equilibrium, the human being equally necessitates space for personal growth, for crucial introspection, and for the resolute maintenance of their individual identity, without this vital need being misconstrued as a lack of affection or a harsh rejection. Lucas felt a wave of profound relief wash over him as he considered the revolutionary idea that his undeniable need to be alone was not, in fact, a personal defect, but rather a deeply ingrained natural instinct. He suddenly found himself standing at a critical juncture, facing a formidable challenge: how to effectively communicate, this utterly essential part of himself to Sophia without her feeling profoundly rejected or wounded. The true confrontation, he realized, was not with Sophia, but with his own deeply held, erroneous belief that his inherent independence was a personal failing, a flaw that needed to be meticulously hidden. He desperately needed to learn how to confidently leap away when he felt that undeniable need for solitude, but simultaneously to know how to purr authentically when he returned, thereby clearly demonstrating that his momentary withdrawal was not a lack of love, but rather a vital means of recharging his emotional batteries, allowing him to love even more profoundly. The profound choice before him was stark. Would he continue to self-negate and diminish himself in a desperate attempt to please, or would he courageously embrace his own fundamental nature, trusting, with a newfound conviction, that a truly healthy relationship can, in fact, not only accommodate but even thrive amidst such a beautiful, inherent duality? The captivating independence of the feline profoundly invites us to critically re-evaluate our own complex relationship with both solitude and autonomy. The cat, in its elegant self-sufficiency, shows us, with compelling clarity, that there is no inherent contradiction in simultaneously seeking out companionship and, at the very same time, deeply valuing individual space. Its often perceived solitary nature does not, in any way, render it less affectionate. Rather, it makes its rare and precious demonstrations of affection more selective, more authentic, and ultimately, more meaningful. By observing the profound wisdom of the cat, we can learn to courageously embrace our own intrinsic need for quiet retreat, to communicate our personal boundaries with unwavering clarity, and to truly understand that genuine love ultimately resides in the liberating freedom to both be oneself and to graciously allow others to be themselves, thereby enabling each individual, in their own unique way, to discover their intrinsic rhythm between the essential poles of proximity and graceful detachment. Mariana felt utterly exhausted, a pervasive weariness that settled deep in her bones. In her professional life, she was the undisputed go-to person, the one everyone instinctively turned to, the problem solver who always seemed to have an answer, the one who, without fail, said an immediate yes to every single request thrown her way. She gave and continued to give, relentlessly pouring out her energy and resources, unconsciously, almost desperately, waiting for a commensurate return, a gesture of recognition, a word of appreciation, an equivalent measure of affection. But what she consistently received was merely more demand, more expectation, an endless list of unfulfilled emotional debts. She found herself hopelessly ensnared in a vicious draining cycle, where her own emotional reservoir was bone dry, completely depleted, while everyone else around her seemed to flourish, buoyed by her relentless energy. The frustration simmered, a silent, corrosive rage bubbling just beneath the surface of her composure. She felt irrevocably used, profoundly invisible, and the only thing her heart truly yearned for was for someone, just for a single fleeting moment, to pet her back, to offer her the same solace she so freely gave. The domestic cat's behavior concerning reciprocity is truly fascinating, a nuanced ballet of subtle cues and unspoken agreements. Unlike a dog, which might offer more overt and effusive demonstrations of affection in explicit exchange for attention or food, the cat operates on a far more subtle system of negotiation. It might delicately rub against your leg to signal a desire for food or gracefully expose its vulnerable belly, an explicit invitation for a gentle stroke. However, if you attempt to force an interaction upon it that it clearly doesn't desire, it will immediately and elegantly withdraw. Or, in a slightly more assertive but equally clear gesture, it might offer a light, claw-sheathed pat with its paw, a precise non-aggressive signal of its established limit. The cat does not feel a primal obligation to reciprocate affection if it is not genuinely inclined to do so, at that very moment. Its reciprocity is fundamentally based on its own innate desire and personal comfort, not on some pre-programmed expectation of social compensation. It offers us a profound lesson. The act of giving and receiving is not a transactional debt to be meticulously collected, but rather a delicate, intuitive dance where both partners must be inherently in sync, attuned to each other's unspoken rhythms. From a neuroscientific perspective, reciprocity in humans is intimately linked to the intricate reward system of the brain. When we receive something valuable in return for what we have generously given, there is a gratifying release of dopamine, a powerful neurotransmitter that reinforces behaviors of cooperation and altruism. However, in situations where this delicate balance of reciprocity becomes profoundly unbalanced, as so painfully exemplified by Mariana's experience, the brain can powerfully signal distress, frustration, and a deep sense of injustice. Ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior, reveals that many animal species, including highly social primates and wolves, do indeed exhibit sophisticated forms of reciprocal behaviors, albeit at widely varying levels of complexity. The cat, in contrast, demonstrates a more autonomous and self-directed form of interaction. It does not perceive itself as owing affection or attention simply because it has received some. This profound feline autonomy invites us to critically question the very nature of our own expectations within relationships and to recognize that not every interaction needs to be a rigid, explicit quid pro quo transaction where every action demands an immediate and perfectly equivalent reciprocation. Mariana, utterly exhausted and emotionally drained, experienced a sudden painful realization. Her pervasive frustration didn't stem solely from the perceived lack of return from others, but rather from her own profound inability to utter the simple, yet incredibly powerful word, no, to unequivocally establish and maintain her own vital boundaries. She had been inextricably trapped in a deeply ingrained belief that by giving more, by relentlessly sacrificing herself, she would somehow become more loved, more valued, more indispensable. But now she understood. Just like the discerning cat that resolutely refuses to be endlessly stroked when it no longer desires it, she desperately needed to learn how to protect her own precious energy, how to assertively say, enough. The true confrontation she finally saw was with her own deeply rooted need for external validation, with the paralyzing fear of being perceived as difficult or selfish. The choice before her was stark and undeniable. Would she continue to self-sacrifice and slowly wither away, or would she, like the wise cat that elegantly withdraws to recharge its innate energies, bravely learn to prioritize and protect her own profound well-being? The intricate nature of giving and receiving, when observed through the discerning and unvarnished lens of the feline, acquires a new, transformative dimension. The cat, in its graceful autonomy, profoundly teaches us that reciprocity is not a rigid obligation, but rather a spontaneous, authentic manifestation of genuine affection and profound comfort. It courageously challenges us to critically question our deeply ingrained expectations about what others owe us in return, and to instead focus our precious energy on our own intrinsic capacity to establish and maintain healthy, resilient boundaries. May we, like these profound feline beings, learn to offer our affection freely, unburdened by attachments or rigid expectations of return, and simultaneously possess the profound wisdom to gracefully withdraw when the delicate balance of exchange becomes profoundly lopsided, thereby fiercely protecting our own vital energy and our intrinsic peace. Paulo felt an agonizing, hollow emptiness descend upon him every single time his children, now fully grown adults, departed from his home after a cherished visit. He had, quite literally, dedicated his entire existence to them, to anticipating and fulfilling their every minute need, to indulging their every fleeting desire. And now, with the house suddenly rendered silent, echoing with their absence, He felt utterly displaced, profoundly purposeless. The attachment he nurtured, a bond so profoundly deep, had, over time, paradoxically transformed into an unbearable burden, an emotional dependency that tragically prevented him from finding even a flicker of joy in his own newfound solitude. He knew, intellectually, that he desperately needed to detach, to loosen his grip. But the mere thought of no longer being the central sun around which someone else's life revolved was absolutely terrifying. A sharp, searing pain in his chest was the heavy, undeniable price of that intense, suffocating fixation, that profound, debilitating inability to simply let go. The domestic cat, in stark contrast to many other cherished pets, exhibits a truly elegant detachment. While they undoubtedly form deep, meaningful bonds with their human guardians and their familiar environments, they possess an extraordinary capacity for adaptability to profound changes. Should a cat be relocated to an entirely new home, it may initially display a period of understandable adjustment, perhaps a fleeting moment of anxiety. However, in the vast majority of cases, it will eventually, and quite gracefully, settle in, meticulously exploring its new surroundings and diligently establishing new comforting routines. This remarkable ability to release its grip, to avoid rigid fixation on a single point of reference, is a deeply ingrained heritage from its wild, nomadic ancestors who were compelled to constantly move in search of sustenance and shelter. The cat, in its fluid adaptability, powerfully demonstrates that attachment does not need to be a prison. Instead, it can be a flexible, resilient connection, inherently capable of gracefully adapting to life's inevitable changes without suffering irreparable breakage. The cat shows us that true love is not about possession, but about allowing freedom, even within connection. From a profound psychological perspective, excessive attachment in humans is often intricately linked to underlying patterns of separation anxiety or a deep-seated, often unconscious, need for absolute control. The intricate limbic system, a crucial network of brain structures primarily responsible for processing emotions and forming memories, can forge intensely powerful associations with specific individuals and places, rendering the process of detachment profoundly painful. However, the remarkable neuroplasticity of the brain, its inherent ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, empowers us to create novel associations, adapt to new realities, and ultimately heal. Ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior, unequivocally teaches us that adaptability is a critical characteristic for the survival and thriving of countless species. The cat, with its innate capacity to gracefully detach from one environment to prosper in another, offers us a compelling model of inherent resilience. Its celebrated independence, a trait we've already explored, beautifully complements its profound capacity for detachment, allowing felines to effortlessly transition between moments of deep proximity and graceful autonomy without succumbing to the crushing anguish of perceived loss. Paulo felt a sharp, almost envious pang at the thought of that innate feline adaptability. He suddenly found himself standing at a profound crossroads, a pivotal moment in his life. Would he continue to cling desperately to the past, to his deeply ingrained role as the constant, indispensable provider, or would he finally embrace the liberating freedom that life, in its new unfolding phase, was so undeniably offering him? The true confrontation, he realized with a painful clarity, was with his very own identity, an identity meticulously constructed around his perceived indispensability and his emotional dependence on others. He desperately needed to learn how to slide out of that suffocating attachment to gracefully disengage, to embark on a transformative journey to find a new, compelling purpose within his own life, one that did not demand the constant validation or the perpetual presence of his children. The choice before him was stark and unequivocal: either continued stagnation in the debilitating pain of perceived loss, or the courageous rediscovery of profound joy in the liberating freedom of his own unique, self-directed path. Paulo felt an agonizing, hollow emptiness descend upon him every single time his children, now fully grown adults, departed from his home after a cherished visit. He had, quite literally, dedicated his entire existence to them, to anticipating and fulfilling their every minute need, to indulging their every fleeting desire. And now, with the house suddenly rendered silent, echoing with their absence, he felt utterly displaced, profoundly purposeless. The attachment he nurtured, a bond so profoundly deep, had, over time, paradoxically transformed into an unbearable burden, an emotional dependency that tragically prevented him from finding even a flicker of joy in his own newfound solitude. He knew, intellectually, that he desperately needed to detach, to loosen his grip, but the mere thought of no longer being the central sun around which someone else's life revolved was absolutely terrifying. A sharp, searing pain in his chest was the heavy, undeniable price of that intense, suffocating fixation, that profound, debilitating inability to simply let go. The domestic cat, in stark contrast to many other cherished pets, exhibits a truly elegant detachment. While they undoubtedly form deep, meaningful bonds with their human guardians and their familiar environments, they possess an extraordinary capacity for adaptability to profound changes. Should a cat be relocated to an entirely new home, it may initially display a period of understandable adjustment, perhaps a fleeting moment of anxiety. However, in the vast majority of cases, it will eventually, and quite gracefully, settle in, meticulously exploring its new surroundings and diligently establishing new comforting routines. This remarkable ability to release its grip, to avoid rigid fixation on a single point of reference, is a deeply ingrained heritage from its wild, nomadic ancestors who were compelled to constantly move in search of sustenance and shelter. The cat, in its fluid adaptability, powerfully demonstrates that attachment does not need to be a prison. Instead, it can be a flexible, resilient connection, inherently capable of gracefully adapting to life's inevitable changes without suffering irreparable breakage. The cat shows us that true love is not about possession, but about allowing freedom, even within connection. From a profound psychological perspective, excessive attachment in humans is often intricately linked to underlying patterns of separation anxiety or a deep-seated, often unconscious, need for absolute control. The intricate limbic system, a crucial network of brain structures primarily responsible for processing emotions and forming memories, can forge intensely powerful associations with specific individuals and places, rendering the process of detachment profoundly painful. However, the remarkable neuroplasticity of the brain, its inherent ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, empowers us to create novel associations, adapt to new realities, and ultimately heal. Ethology, the scientific study of animal behavior, unequivocally teaches us that adaptability is a critical characteristic for the survival and thriving of countless species. The cat, with its innate capacity to gracefully detach from one environment to prosper in another, offers us a compelling model of inherent resilience. Its celebrated independence, a trait we've already explored, beautifully complements its profound capacity for detachment, allowing felines to effortlessly transition between moments of deep proximity and graceful autonomy without succumbing to the crushing anguish of perceived loss. Paulo felt a sharp, almost envious pang at the thought of that innate feline adaptability. He suddenly found himself standing at a profound crossroads, a pivotal moment in his life. Would he continue to cling desperately to the past, to his deeply ingrained role as the constant, indispensable provider, or would he finally embrace the liberating freedom that life, in its new unfolding phase, was so undeniably offering him? The true confrontation, he realized with a painful clarity, was with his very own identity, an identity meticulously constructed around his perceived indispensability and his emotional dependence on others. He desperately needed to learn how to slide out of that suffocating attachment to gracefully, disengaged to embark on a transformative journey to find a new, compelling purpose within his own life, one that did not demand the constant validation or the perpetual presence of his children. The choice before him was stark and unequivocal: either continued stagnation in the debilitating pain of perceived loss, or the courageous rediscovery of profound joy in the liberating freedom of his own unique, self-directed path. The elegant detachment of the cat offers us a remarkably powerful and often challenging perspective on the fundamental nature of impermanence and constant change. It teaches us, with profound simplicity, that true connection does not necessitate possessiveness, and that the crucial ability to gracefully let go is, in fact, just as vital and profound as the ability to deeply love. May we, like these wise and graceful felines, learn to form deep, meaningful bonds, but simultaneously possess the innate wisdom to adapt, to courageously find profound beauty in life's continuous transitions, and to wholeheartedly embrace solitude not as an emptiness, but as a rich and vital opportunity for profound self-discovery. Attachment, when held with flexibility and grace, ultimately liberates us rather than irrevocably trapping us. Clara lived in a perpetual state of simmering irritation, a low-grade hum of resentment that vibrated constantly beneath her calm exterior. In her own home, her siblings, and even her parents, seemed to perpetually invade her personal space, taking her belongings without a second thought, asking relentlessly intrusive questions that chipped away at her sense of privacy. At work, the situation was no different. Colleagues frequently interrupted her concentration, demanding her immediate attention at every turn, as if her time and focus were endlessly available for their taking. She felt with a growing sense of despair that her privacy, her very individuality, was being systematically and constantly violated. Inside, a dormant volcano of rage silently bubbled, yet she found herself utterly incapable of expressing it. The crippling fear of being perceived as difficult or aggressive effectively muzzled her, preventing her from asserting her fundamental right to impose necessary boundaries. She felt profoundly suffocated, rendered utterly invisible, perpetually on the precipice of an emotional collapse, desperately yearning for just a single moment of peace and a clear recognition of her own inviolable space. The remarkable way a cat imposes its boundaries is a masterclass in nonverbal communication, a subtle yet incredibly effective language of self-assertion. When a cat unequivocally does not wish to be touched or disturbed, its initial response is often a clear, yet gentle, signal. It might elegantly turn its head away, a subtle dismissal. If that isn't understood, it might simply move away, padding softly to a different spot, clearly indicating its desire for space. Should these initial, polite cues be ignored or misinterpreted, the cat may escalate its communication, but still with profound grace and precision. It might offer a very light, almost feather-like pat with a paw, claws meticulously sheathed. This isn't an act of aggression, but a precise, unmistakable signal of its established limit. This far and no further. This behavior teaches us that boundaries are not about anger, but about clear, respectful communication of personal limits, and that these limits, when asserted, are paramount to maintaining one's sense of self and well-being. The cat, in its innate wisdom, understands that self-respect begins with defining and protecting one's personal domain. From a deep psychological perspective, the inability to effectively set and maintain boundaries in humans is often intricately linked to deeply ingrained patterns of people-pleasing, a profound fear of conflict, or an unconscious belief that one's own needs are somehow less important than those of others. The brain's limbic system, particularly the amygdala, can trigger anxiety or guilt responses when we contemplate asserting ourselves, leading us to avoid necessary confrontations. However, learning to establish boundaries is a crucial aspect of emotional intelligence and self-preservation. Ethology, through the study of animal behavior, reveals that many species, including our feline companions, possess innate mechanisms for defining and defending their personal space and resources. The cat's gentle paw serves as an exquisite, instinctual example of assertiveness without aggression. It demonstrates that clear, nonverbal communication can be profoundly effective in conveying needs and limits, thus preventing escalation and maintaining harmonious, albeit respectful, coexistence. This innate feline ability highlights that recognizing and communicating our own boundaries is not selfish. It is a fundamental act of self-respect that ultimately benefits all relationships by creating clarity and mutual understanding. Clara, feeling the pressure mount, suddenly recognized the pattern. Her perpetual irritation was a direct consequence of her failure to communicate her boundaries. She was constantly allowing others to trespass, eroding her inner peace. She realized that her reluctance to speak up wasn't politeness. It was a form of self-abandonment, driven by the deeply ingrained fear of negative judgment. This was her moment of truth, a pivotal internal confrontation. Would she continue to absorb the constant invasions, allowing her inner volcano to erupt, or would she, like the cat, courageously deploy her own gentle paw, asserting her right to space and respect? The choice was no longer about avoiding conflict. It was about preserving her own mental and emotional integrity. She needed to move beyond the fear of being chada and embrace the strength of self-affirmation. The cat's inherent wisdom in setting boundaries offers as a profound and empowering lesson for our own human relationships. The feline demonstrates that defining and defending one's personal space is not an act of hostility, but a fundamental act of self-respect and self-care. It teaches us that clear communication, even nonverbal, is essential for healthy coexistence, and that protecting our energy is vital for our overall well-being. May we, like these elegant masters of self-possession, learn to recognize our own limits, communicate them clearly and respectfully, and thus live lives where our personal space is honored and our emotional energy is preserved. It's about finding that delicate balance between connection and the crucial need for protected individual space.